Okay, good afternoon all. Sorry, you may see a bit of movement behind me because there are still people trickling in, but I don't want to delay the start of this meeting too much longer. First of all, thank you for sparing the time for this playback, and welcome to this meeting which will last about an hour and a half notionally, to play back to central parties and software providers. For those of you that haven't met me, my name's Giles Claydon, and I'm the Deputy Programme Manager working into and supporting Keith as the Programme Manager on MHHS. And what I'd like to do is just to quickly just give you an overview of how we're going to construct this afternoon and the agenda. So if we can move on to the next slide, please, Joe. So we're just at, as you can see here, we're in the welcome and instruction stage, but in a minute I'm going to hand over to Jenny Booth, who I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry, that's the echo gone. You should only hear this once. I'm going to hand over to Jenny. Sorry, Jenny. Every time I introduce you on these calls, we seem to have some mishap. But anyway, Jenny, in a minute I will be handing over to you just to give us a sponsor message on behalf of Ofgem, and then I'll hand over to Keith, who will set out the round 3 objectives and an overall approach that we've been taking. And then it will come back to me to give an overview of the high-level plan before we then step through each of the programme phases. And I'm going to invite the SME leads to take a lead on each of those phases, and they will introduce themselves as we come to each of the sections in this afternoon's agenda. We've then left some time at the end, so this is notionally a split of 2/3, a third. I think we may want to flex that depending on where some of the questions and the discussion goes. But notionally, during the course of this afternoon, we'll pause at various points to have questions to take place. But the only slight caveat is I'm really keen that we cover all the phases of the programme. So if we are getting very bogged down in one section, I may ask that we pause and try and park that and come back to that for a wrap-up question session at the end, because I think to be most benefit, we need to give you a very good and comprehensive end-to-end view of how the plan's now constructed to support the round 3 feedback. The last comment here is you may see on the Teams, we are recording this session, and we do intend to publish this up on the portal at the end for any participants who have been unable to make this today. Hopefully they'll benefit by hearing and seeing any of the questions that come out of this focus session. So I think that's it on the agenda from my side. I think I may have seen a hand go up or a comment come through, but I think it may have disappeared from my screen. So if there are no further no comments or questions, I think we will hand over to you, Jenny, for the sponsor.
Great, thanks, Giles. Good afternoon, everyone, and I'll apologise up front if other people are going to hear this message numerous times as we go through, because I'll be attending all these playback sessions. So, as you can imagine, from the sponsor's point of view, we are really keen that we get a robust, viable, and credible plan together. There are a number of drivers for that I'll touch on in a second, but one of the things that we are keen for industry participants to do is to provide the necessary granular information to the programme for 2 reasons. One, for us as the sponsor to make sure that we've got the relevant degree of information so we can make an informed decision on the plan, and 2, really for the program to have the opportunity to work with you guys collaboratively to check and challenge. So for one of the things we will be looking at when we try to assess the viability of the plan is timeframes, the justification for timeframes, if any sensitivity analysis has been done around those timeframes, because there are a large number of eyes on this program. One particularly being Bays. Bays have a keen interest in this program as they see it as an enabler for a number of their strategic projects. So they are quite keen for this program to be implemented as soon as practicable. And one of the things we will need to do, as I was just in a meeting earlier on with them, is to justify any timeframes we have in the program. And for us to do that, we really need to have the evidence to support and justify whatever the final solution and final timelines that come out of this. So, there will be some rigor around this, and of course we've got to take it through our own internal governance if it's impinging on any other strategic activity. So again, the plea is really provide as much granular information as possible to the program to help yourselves and it deliver a really rigorous and viable plan. um, that's all I wanted to say, but I did have a question, and it is quite specific to this group. We've called this central parties and software providers. Is there a distinct difference between these naming we're giving to companies here, and do they perform quite a distinct and different role? It's just something I want to get clear in my head, because then I can understand the nature of any comments that may come up in the session later on today. But as I said, it's really just to use this opportunity to get all your points across and ask all the questions that need to be asked while we have this opportunity, because timelines are quite constrained here in making sure the right information is available as soon as possible. That's all I wanted to say. Open to any questions if anyone has any.
I think it might have been me. I started to put into circles, but then I think I was getting.
Yeah.
Then I was thinking that's too much actually.
What? Sorry.
Did everyone hear me when I spoke? Sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, that's
Yes,
good.
yes, you're
I'm sorry, Jenny. We're struggling. We're trying to keep the echo away.
Okay.
Just now sound. Okay. Can you still hear us?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Good. Okay. Keith, over to you, and hopefully the technology will flare up.
Good afternoon, everybody. Just some basic information, which some of which you've seen before, but just to set context around the session. So the plan, as you know, is a draft. It is a plan for consultation purposes. Popgen's involvement in this has only been to be aware of the process and to sponsor it. They are not, their involvement shouldn't be seen as any kind of implicit endorsement of the plan at this stage. It's the best illustration we have in terms of how we think the program can be delivered, but it is only at the end of the process that we will be going through governance and ultimately to Ofgem to get approval for this plan. So as we all know, this plan, and as Jenny said, it has to be achievable and realistic, but also the quickest plan to get to the end, given that this program is a big enabler for such net zero programs. So it's a really important thing to get right, and as Jenny says, to focus on it. We are expecting participants, all participants, to be very engaged in the consultation. We would appreciate everybody responding to round 3. There's been a fair amount of time, elapsed time, between sending it out on the 14th of December and the eventual and final deadline on the 31st of January. So we hope this additional time will allow participants to be more able to respond. So the intention between the process is to consult on the plan and to help us identify a clear plan that can be used to form a baseline program plan going forward post the approval. And the objectives of the process are that we end up with consulting on the plan, and we gauge the feasibility of your own delivery plans to whether it's to be provided as part of the response process. We are asking for you to express whether or not you are interested in participating in the SIT, Systems Integration Testing, which we'll explain further length later. And we're also asking for evidence of your DBT plans, and this information will be used to go through a further process of approval of the M3 milestone across the programme. But it's really important for us to understand not only if you are interested in the SIT, but actually whether your DBT plans suggest that you'll be ready to get into SIT as well. And obviously for central parties, they're critical part to reaching SIT entry, and for software providers, they may well be a key part of this as well. So the consultation says 16th of January for participants to respond if they are interested in SIT. If you do reply later than that in the month, you won't be included from SIT. This is more just to understand where you're at the moment. So if you could move on to the next slide. The artifacts, you're well aware of most of the artifacts. They have moved on considerably. If you looked at these already, they are quite heavier and more fulsome than has been the case in the past. Round one of the consultation was more to get people used to the plan and to understand the kind of high levels. Round two progressed it to some extent, but we expressed knowledge about some areas of weakness and gaps in that plan. But round three is much more extensive. The implementation approach is new, and that's the way of bringing everything together to give you the helicopter view of the plan. And then the underpinning artifacts are much more exhaustive, and I think we'll give you a lot more information as a basis for your responses. And the consultation questions are, an online form which should be easy to fill in and it'll be easiest for us to get your information out as well. We do expect, in line with your obligations, all participants to respond to this consultation. And at the end of the round three process, the PSG will be made aware of those that have and haven't responded to the process. So we have that transparency. This is an industry programme, and we're looking for industry engagement and participation. You can't do this plan without your feedback and your evidence, and that's really important to us. But an important thing also to notice is that whilst in round one and round two, the plan made a lot of assumptions about the delivery approaches towards SIT and qualification and so on. We are now expecting through this calendar quarter, a lot of the working groups will be getting on the front foot in relation to looking at the detailed elements of these delivery approaches. And we would ideally want the Replan to be a support for what is being agreed through the working groups. So the SIT approach and some of the details about how participants will get through SIT, how participants will go through qualification and how qualification function will be working. These things will be discussed in detail through working groups, and the outputs of those working groups will be baked into any developing plan for rebaseline. And one would hope, therefore, at the end of this process, when we do rebaseline the plan, that there will be a lot less assumptions, and the information is much more widely through consensus and through governance. So it's very important to note that this plan and the resulting activities should be a lot stronger, as long as we have the right engagement through the working groups and through the responses to the consultation. So it's different and I think much more material to getting us where we want to be in round three. That's all I want to say at this stage in terms of setting the context around the plan.
Okay, thanks, Keith. So what I want to do next is just to talk you through the high-level plan that I'm sure many of you have seen already, that sits within the implementation approach. And probably what I should have mentioned at the start is a lot of the material that we're going to draw on this afternoon will be drawn from the implementation approach that sat as one of those artifacts, as Keith just mentioned. And there are a few additional changes that we will draw out during the course of this afternoon, where we have reflected some immediate feedback that we've had since the consultation on the 16th, which should be helpful in terms of some of the clarifications that you may be seeking, if not today, once you really start to unpick some of the artifacts that we provided. So in terms of the plan here, as I mentioned, this reflects the plan that was in the implementation approach. but with two minor updates, which if you can read the small box in red at the top, the two changes are, we noticed once we'd issued this that there was a slight error in the date around what we term CP3 here, which is a critical path, and I'll talk about those in a minute. We've also added an additional swim lane in there in probably what looks like the burgundy red colour, which is entitled non-sit LDSO. So I'll talk through that as well. So in terms of the plan here, the swim lanes, as you can see, cover each of the main phases of the programme, and covering DBT, SIT qualification, regulation, code drafting, and then migration, and then finally the go live stages and the implementation of the new settlements. Now, within this plan, we have set out what are essentially three critical paths through the programme. The fastest of these, and this comes back to one of the choices that you will be asked to make and elect for as you go through the round 3 consultation. The fastest of these is the pace at which participants can get to migration by following the SIT route, and essentially coming forward for us as a programme to what we're calling a minimum viable cohort. And the minimum viable cohorts will be a subset of those SIT participants that we know that we must have within the testing in order to fully exercise and test the SIT, the core design, the core central design within the programme. So the fastest route through the programme is reflected by the very heavy dashed line in red, and that underpins the fact that if you elect to go for SIT, you will not have to elect to go down the qualification process, with the exception of the SAD element of qualification. The next fastest route will be for those non-SIT participants that are first into qualification through the pace of going through their design, build and test stage, and comprise what we are calling the first tranche of qualification. And as you can see, and as alluded to by the critical path shown here, occurs about 6 to 8 months after the MVC goes live in migration. The final critical path and the longest path is for the last tranche of participants who go through qualification, and that essentially the full red line that you see there on the right is to the purest amongst you represents the programme critical path, and the critical path taken to get to the new settlement code, which is the ultimate goal of the programme. So turning to each of the phases, there's probably no surprises. We're currently very much into the system design and build stage at the moment. And for the central parties on this call, we know only too well that our focus is turning towards how we monitor and assure progress through this stage in order to ensure that we support and help get you through the DBT stage, culminating in PIT. Also, during the round 3 consultation, there is the focus, as I've just mentioned, in terms of asking participants to elect and state their interest in being SIT participants. And ultimately, the participants that come forward for SIT will also be monitoring in the same way in order to help and support those participants be ready for SIT. And our target date, based on the feedback through previous rounds and the evolution of the programme approach, is to hit that tree into SIT component integration by the end of October. So that covers system design and build. So moving on further down to the next stage, covers the SIT testing, which, as I have mentioned, the focus there is ensuring that we have fully tested the full core design as a which requires the minimum viable cohort to make sure we've exercised all the main areas of functionality and the use cases. And we need to get through that stage in order to prove the environment that we need for qualification. And I'm skipping over and saying that the swim lane in Burgundy. But the main component here that we're striving to complete at pace is the SIT functional testing. And through these areas, there we have several cycles, and Don will come on to that when we do the deep dive into the SIT phase. Once we've gone through SIT functional, we know we've proven the capability and the functionality needed for the UIT environment, I should say, to support the qualification stage, which is the next phase or the next point at which participants can enter the program. And that phase notionally goes on for the testing, for each tranche of testing, and we've set out within the implementation approach 7 tranches. That is a current sensible working assumption on the program, as Jason will explain. Actually, the approach towards qualification is not entirely in control of the central program, and is at semi-arm's length from Alexon and the code bodies that administer that. So that time frame is notionally 6 months for qualification, and there's it shrouded in about a further 1 or 2 months there that we anticipate for the governance that needs to sit around the entry and exit ends of qualification, which will be controlled by the performance assurance board or the PAP board. Qualification has 2 components to it, as I've mentioned previously. The first of those is the direct testing. The second area of that is the qualification SAD process, which covers the wider business and operational service wrap. The other point to make around qualification as well is that entry into qualification is similar to entry into SIT. It will be based on the monitoring through the DBT 1 stage and formal PIT to mark the entry into that testing. By the end of qualification, and this again goes for SIT participants as well, DBT2 testing, which is the wider testing related to the business and impacted areas, that also needs to complete by the end of qualification. Once a participant, through whatever route has reached the point of qualification, through either the SIT path or the qualification path, they can then go into migration. I mentioned non-SIT LDSO testing. We recognise that actually to go live, and particularly the need, we recognise in going live, we need to have all the LDSOs nationally who have also achieved qualification as well. And there is a separate stream there outside the formal SIT stream, but reflective of testing that needs to take place in order to achieve qualification, that needs to take place by the first migration, which is for the MVC participants. The final stage, and I'll stop and pause for questions in a minute, is that once all the MPANs have been migrated, and we have in this plan allowed an 18-month window for that to take place, which is different from round 2. Our modelling suggests that we need to afford more time for this space. That concludes by the end of 2026. We have left an elapsed time of a minimum of 2 months. That may be longer, and Jason will talk about that before we then implement the new settlement code. I'm going to stop there. I can see there've been a few comments coming up there. I just want to make sure within those comments I'll be focused on the slides. There are no questions there. Are there any questions from anybody if I pause there? But that's just a very brief overview about how the plan as a whole hangs together. We'll move on into the deep dives in a minute if there are no questions here. Graham.
Hi. Sorry, can I just clarify then? So the swim lane in Burgundy, the non-SIT LDS. Can you hear me?
Well, mute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Graham, I can hear you, so I think it's just a problem in the room that they're addressing.
Oh, okay.
Right.
I'll wait a minute.
Yeah, okay, we can now hear, you.
Okay. Oh, blimey, I can hear you about 4 times now. Yeah, sorry, the non-SIT LDSO testing, that row there, can I just clarify then? So the LDSOs, when they've been through that, that is essentially the same as having gone through qualification testing. So it's almost like an early tranche of qualification. You don't then have to go through qualification independently of having done the non-SIT LDSO testing.
That's a bit great. Sounds like we've got the.
I'm really struggling to hear. It's just echoing backwards and forwards.
That's me. If I might the mic.
Do we still have the echo, or is that okay?
No, that's better now.
Can't hear them quite so much. Someone else got the sound on, or the mic on. Okay.
So let me check. There might be a little bit of audio.
Right now.
Is that still echo?
It is, unfortunately, yes. It's.
Shall I speak? No, that's not working. That's really yours.
Try now.
Do we still have the echo? Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can. That's better.
Okay, I don't know whose machine is that coming out of?
It's coming out of your speaker. Speaker.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you can hear me okay, can you, Graham?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Okay, good. The magic happened somehow. So I think the simple answer to your question was yes. Effectively, this is one of the big differences between the round 2 plan and the 3P plan. What we've effectively done is bring forward the testing that would have been done in the qualification tranche 1 that we identified in the round 2 plan. We brought that forward into a separate set of activities in advance of M11, the start of migration, for the reasons that Charles set out. We recognised an anomaly in that M10 in the original transition timetable only identified that registration services need to be there as part of the central party milestone, and we've realised that actually if we don't have UMSO and network operations as part of that qualified set of DNO services, then we do not have all MPANs available to be migrated at the start of M11. So what we've done is bring that set of qualification testing forward into that maroon bar that you can see in the POEC, but you don't have to do it again as part of the qualification test. That testing evidence would then be provided as part of the evidence, as part of the assessment document that would be taken to PAB for approval of qualified LDSOs.
Okay. All right. No, that's fine. That answers the question. So basically, it's instead of, it's almost like a subset of SIT testing, but done in order to get everybody through qualification, what would have been qualification early.
Exactly right. Exactly right. It's okay. To get that box for qualification, and we had a short discussion around it in the qualification working group earlier. We will progress the scope of those tests through the qualification working group, I think.
Okay, no, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Thanks, Jason. Carolyn?
Yeah, it was just some clarification on, I think you mentioned the migration time period in 18 months. I think I was working on the expectation it was 12 months, and the tier 1 milestones M11 and M12 have 1 year. So just a little bit of clarification before we move on what the actual length of the migration is, please.
Yep. So the migration window, as a working assumption here, that will continue to be refined through the modelling as we go forward. And I think Keith touched upon some of the assumptions that we know need to further be evolved and refined at the start. But there has been a change in round 3 based on the modelling that we've done, that window is 18 months from the MVC going live, as shown here on the plan on a page. In terms of the those participants that go through qualification, the notional timeframe remains at 12 months. So as you can see, the 2 blue swim lanes on the two blue lines on the penultimate swim lane on this show 18 months overlaid over the 12-month one. The 12-month window there is essentially the window for those participants who are going through the qualification routes. And what this underlies actually is the advantages of going forward for SIT early, that actually you get a bigger window in order to essentially complete the migration. Although, you know, we expect that those participants will want to migrate as quickly as possible in order to, you know, reap the benefits of being in SIT and going through that route sooner.
So thank you for that. So does the M11 and M12 on that first Tier 1 milestone swim lane represent the start date of MVC or the start date of the next first wave of qualification?
M11 represents the start of MVC.
Okay, because it still says 1 year, I think, so just maybe that's fine. So it's 18 months from that point for those that are in MVC, and then it's an opportunity for 12 months for those that follow the first and they're on qualification entry. Or whatever's left of that 12 months, depending on when you actually qualify.
Sorry, Karen, I was just looking at a bigger version on my screen, which I was pausing. I think your question, would you mind just repeating your question again?
Yes, so the start of M11 and M12 on that first swim lane, it still has 1 year, but I think what I've heard is actually that's 18 months for MVC, and expectations are it's 12 months for those that follow the qualification route after MVC. Is that correct?
Correct. You're sorry, that is an oversight on our part, and we will update that.
That's fine. It's just clarification, and it's actually an expectation of 12 months. Presumably, it's whatever period of migration is left once you are qualified, as long as it's qualified before M14. Is that correct? So if you follow qualification early after MVC, you'll have the full 12 months opportunity. If you follow mid or late, as long as it's before M14, you might have less than 12 months. It's a kind of ticking clock, is it?
That's correct.
That's correct. Yeah, and that's why, you know, I think there are clear advantages to progressing through the program sooner rather than later, particularly in terms of the opportunity and the window through the qualification stage.
Lovely, that's helpful. Thank you very much.
Migration stage, I beg your pardon, not qualification. Okay, what I'd like to do actually, because I think a lot of these questions will be, it's another hand. Sorry, I should come out of that and go back onto the screen. Steve.
Okay. Yeah, hi. What's the entry criteria for SIT? How are we going to ensure that the quality of deliverables is sufficiently robust such that SIT finishes in the timescale that it's planned to?
Steve, if I may, I think we will pick up that, and it's almost a very good segue into the next
okay,
step
fine.
that we're going to take you through. But please keep me honest on that. We'll come back to that question if we don't answer it adequately, and I'll try and chair the meeting accordingly. So I am conscious of time, so if we can move on to the next section, next slide, please, Joe. Sorry, I'm just waiting for it to come up. So I'll hand over to Paul to take us through DBT. Paul, just introduce yourself as well.
Okay, thank you. Afternoon, everyone. My name's Paul Pettit. I head up the design team. All I'm going to do is just give you a couple of minutes about just to hopefully answer that question that's just come up about what we're doing with regards to entry criteria. One of the things that we're doing, we're moving on. We've undertaken an exercise to do design assurance of the design. Now we're looking to focus on design assurance from a participant point of view. We've got the design coming up for approval at the DAG on the 31st of this month. And shortly after that, on the 8th of February, we should be uplifting all of the artifacts to version 5. Now, obviously, some parties have already started their design build test. And what we're here to do is basically support everybody through that process. We're doing that in a number of ways. We're looking to do an assurance of participant design. We'll be issuing some guidance documents towards the end of this month, early next month. And as part of that, we're looking to make sure that, you understand the design, you can find everything you need to be able to find. The design that's been together and been signed off, we're augmenting that with additional artifacts and additional through the collaboration base. So you, as a central body, central party, can basically focus on areas of the design that relate to you. And so as part of that, we'll be supporting you. We have the use of the design mailbox, which I know some parties have already started to use to comment on the design. That will continue, and we'll basically be responding and answering your questions. So that will continue throughout the whole of design build test. And then what we'll also be doing is issuing guidance notes and looking at your design and providing an independent view really to the program of readiness for SIT. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to Nigel, who will take you into a bit more detail about the DBT1 and DBT2 phases of the program.
Nigel Hunt here in the testing work stream. So just to take the question from
Matt.
I was just wondering how you're going to assure design and when you're looking to assure participants' designs.
We're looking to start as soon as practically possible. The design, the Helix side of things, it will be done through a series of questions, self-answer questions, and basically interviews. We've got some guidance coming out, and that's going through the SRO for approval at the moment. Suffice to say, Helix might be one of the first ones we start to look at because of the key and central role it plays in SIT.
Okay.
Thanks very much. Testing is part of DBT, DBT1 and 2. So I'll talk about PIT. So the PIT part is the back end, the T, the very last part of the T in DBT1 and DBT2. You have to go through that. All participants have to go through that, whether they go through the SIT or qualification path. From a perspective of what's required here, it will be we'll provide the guidance, and that's coming out at the end of the month, and that will describe how to do it, how we will assure it, and the entry and exit into that. Participants will be provided, they will need to run this themselves and provide evidence at the end. Those are the key components of this. It will be the exit report. I think there's some more slides on this from a testing perspective, so I'm going to ask Joe to come in a minute, but just DBT2 just very quickly. So I just got that. DBT2 very quickly. That is around the back-end systems and consequence of change. Sorry, Joe, you brought again one there. Apologies there. So PIT. It comprises functional, non-functional, performance, load, resilience, and security in accordance with their design requirements and artifacts, and regression as required at the end of the phase. It's the responsibility of each individual party using their own systems, their test environments, their test data, scenarios and scripts, their own test processes, the management tool and associated defect management process. As part of the SI or the qualification route, as appropriate, the games come out as part of the qualification guidance. We will provide assurance of the PIT approach test plan, the required traceability matrix, and just for clarity on that, in this context, there's a required test traceability matrix on top of the current traceability matrix that already exists from a requirements perspective. We'll expect PIT scenarios for test scripts to be provided. Talk about a regular execution progress report. We'll provide guidance on what that means and what that looks like, and we'll obviously keep an update in your progress towards the end of PIT and into the qualification. And the key one again is a PIT test completion report. So again, we provide templates for these. You don't have to use a template. You can have your own processes, your own templates, as long as they do include the key elements that we'll provide in there. We go to the next slide, please. So, are there any questions on PIT before we go on to that?
We've got Nigel.
Nigel.
Hi Nigel, just a quick one again, just to clarify, make sure we are on the same understanding. PIT, whilst it's under our control to manage that execution and the tests within that session, I assume that PIT exit strategy, that PIT exit criteria forms the SIT entry criteria. So we will need to make sure that PIT testing is adequate to enter SIT. Is that correct?
It's a key part. So from a guidance perspective, we will talk about the exit criteria. From an entry criteria, you must have completed the SIT, PIT in accordance with those requirements. So it's not an exit criteria, but it is an entry criteria. If that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thanks very much.
We've got another question from Rachel.
Rachel.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to check. So any kind of testing that forms part of DBT2, I just want to clarify that would be for parties to test individually and not part of, say, the qualification test phase. I'm just thinking more in terms of like CRM and billing systems. Would parties just need to provide evidence of that as part of internal PIT testing?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, so they wouldn't need to go into qualification testing for that. It would just be as part of qualification evidence.
Yes.
Okay.
That's right. That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Another question, I think.
I think that's right.
That's right.
That's it. Okay, thanks.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Nigel. Over to you, Dom.
Thanks, Giles. Thanks, Nigel. So for those of you that haven't met yet, my name's Dominic Mooney, and I'm the SIT lead on the MHHS program. So to give you an overview of systems integration testing, so just touching upon what we were talking about there in terms of PIT, there are two core elements. So initially we'll be looking to assess and assure the evidence of the pre-integration testing that's been carried out by participants. Nigel's just gone through that, so I won't talk about the deliverables that we're expecting there as an output, but that will form one of the entry criteria into SIT, along with other readiness aspects, so in terms of environments and test data and so forth. And then there is the systems integration testing itself, which the scenarios for that are going to be specified by the SI, and will be in the phase demonstrating functional, non-functional, migration-related characteristics of the market interfaces and services in an integrated environment. Participants are expected to provide the relevant PIT test artifacts, which is covered. You'll be expected to demonstrate test environment network connectivity prior to SIT, and we'll also be asking for any detailed SIT test steps that are specific to your systems, and then recording the test execution results within the MHHS test management tool, which will be ADO. As an SI, we'll be assuring test readiness of all sit entrants. We'll be providing a test approach and plan, which is going to be developed in the SIT-wide group. We will be providing a test data approach and plan, both overarching for the program and also specific to each test stage. We'll be specifying the overarching scenarios and scripts for SIT based on the design. We'll be verifying that hit exit criteria have been met for entry into SIT. And then during SIT, we'll be assuring all SIT results. And we'll be ensuring the availability of the relevant test harnesses, test environments, and the appropriate test data against which each participant will be testing in SIT. We will also be managing the SIT process and schedule and coordinating that. We'll be providing access and training to the test management tool, and we'll also be providing overall defect and issue management for any centrally raised issues, and that will include the triage and coordination of any environment or release coordination. Associated deliverables will be, as I've mentioned, the test approaches and plans for each stage, and also the test data approaches and plans. We will be providing an overarching SIT stage readiness report, and also completion reports, and a defect management plan, and test management tool user guide. If there's no questions on that, I'll ask Joe to just move on to the next slide. Thank you, Joe. So central to the SIT approach is a program construct, which is the minimum viable cohorts, the MVC. And what this is we're looking to move at the pace of the fastest within systems integration testing, in order that we can form an MVC that will allow us to exercise the SIT coverage as quickly as possible. And the composition of the MVC is outlined on the left-hand lower portion of this slide. So that will include all central systems, obviously, and then at least one of the following LDSOs, so St. Clement's, IDNOs covering network operations services and UMSO services, and also supplier agents. And then we'll also be looking for at least 2 of each of the following, which is all service provider types, and 2 of each supplier. In terms of the approach, I'm just going to flick to the next supplementary slide, which wasn't included in the implementation approach, but hopefully is a little bit of a clearer view of the planning assumptions and the onboarding into SIT. And the reason why we've included this is based on early feedback that we received on the round 3 consultation. So what I want to do here is kind of call out the steps that the participants will follow. So as Keith and Giles mentioned earlier, we have asked for participants that are intending to volunteer for SIT to hopefully be able to provide indication of this by the 16th of January. That said, any participant that responds by the 31st of January and does intend to volunteer for SIT won't be excluded from SIT. Following that, there'll be a period of the programme assuring delivery plans of those SIT volunteers, and then we will reach a milestone of agreeing SIT candidates by the 23rd of April 23. At this point, there'll be no distinction between MVC and all other SIT participants. So essentially, it will just be a group of SIT volunteers. We will continue to monitor those volunteers throughout their DBT and eventual PIT conclusion. Then we'll be looking to integrate SIT participants into CIT in an integrated approach, a progressive integration approach, apologies, starting first with the DIP and Helix, and then MPRS, and then progressively other roles in 2-week intervals. And this is a sequence that is being developed within the SIT working group. which we've discussed at yesterday's working group, and I recommend you attend that working group where we're going to develop that approach in a bit more detail. Obviously, as we've said, we're expecting all participants to demonstrate PIT completion and SIT readiness prior to SIT CIT commencement. So outside of the PIT completion, the readiness will involve environment connectivity, test data, the loading and verification of, and any test steps required in order to execute the scenarios. Once SIT CIT as a test stage is completed, we're not intending to include any further participants after that stage. So once we start functional testing, that will be the full group of SIT participants. And based on that early progress, we'll be looking to form the MVC based on the pace of those participants that are moving the fastest. And that will be based on criteria of the number of tests successfully passed and the number of defects that are currently open and need to be resolved. We will then prioritize the MVC in terms of execution objectives, but we will also support other participants alongside that. And the reason for that is, as I said, we're looking to execute and exercise as much of the functionality within the solution as early as possible. But we will support other participants to conclude that SIT coverage within a longer timeline. So once we start functional testing and the other test stages, so migration, non-functional and operational test, we will move at the speed of the fastest of the MVC, but we will continue on for a period up until the 7th of April, so that other SIT participants outside of the MVC can to execute their coverage. What we're recommending is that all participants target commencement of testing at the same time as the MVC for each stage, and this will become more critical within the SIT-B environment, where the migration non-functional operational testing will be carried out. And that is to mitigate the risk of scheduling priority for the MVC, meaning that it's more difficult for other participants to complete their coverage within the allotted window for SIT. And obviously, any SIT participant dropping out for SI testing for whatever reason, you know, whether that's a critical internal defect has been found, that participant will then need to proceed and conclude their testing via the non-SIT route. And we have talked to the code delivery bodies about a principle where any execution that has occurred in SIT will be considered as a credit towards any qualification testing requirements. So Joe, if you don't mind just moving on to the next slide, where we depict that in a POAP. So as you can see there, we've got in the first swim lane SIT CIT running from the 30th of October to the 9th of Feb 24. As I say, we'll be looking to progressively integrate all participants into that testing stage in 2-week intervals, and no later than the end of the stage minus 2 weeks. So the last entry point will be the 29th of January 24. Obviously, we won't be looking to integrate all parties at that very last point. So we'll be working with you via the SIT working group to establish the sequence by which we prefer to integrate parties. And we've already gone through that in the last couple of working groups, and we will formalise that in the SIT CIT test approach plan. And then moving on to functional testing. So as I mentioned at the beginning of functional testing, all participants will start at the same point. We've structured the testing into 3 cycles. The intention being to exercise as much functionality as possible in cycle 1. Obviously accepting that there may be some blocking defects that need to be resolved. And then in cycle 2, having brought in as many defect resolutions as possible. We will then run a cycle of testing which is focused on that retesting, any outstanding coverage and any targeted regression testing associated with defect fixes. And then if there are any more defects that are flushed out in that cycle, we will then close that out in cycle 3. Alongside that, we'll be starting SIP migration on the 10th of June 24. A lot of that testing will be functionally based, and we'll also then, with some degree of overlap, start the NFT. And the target is that we will look to instigate having executed as much functional coverage as possible, institute a code freeze by the 21st of October 24. That will then lead into a cycle of regression testing on that code freeze base, and also trigger the start of end-to-end sandbox testing, which you can see in the bottom swim lane there under UIT. And just to call out, we mentioned earlier the non-SIT LDSO testing that we're looking to bring forward. We're aligning the start of that testing at the beginning of cycle 2, and that will run through to the 24th of January 25. Once we reach the 3rd of January 25, we're looking to conclude SIT functional testing for the MVC. And by that point, we have hopefully concluded all of the migration, NFT, and operational testing to a point that will enable us to start qualification execution on the 20th of January 25. And as I mentioned, we will then continue to support other SIT participants to continue to conclude their test coverage up until the 7th of April 25. So unless there's any questions around that or any requests for clarification, I think we can move on, Giles.
Yep, thanks.
We've got a question there from Steve.
Sorry, yeah, sorry. Do I take it that you've, towards the end of 24, we've got 4 different SIT environments running in parallel?
No, we've actually got 3. So
right, okay.
If you look in the top right-hand box there,
yeah.
The environment. So SIT A is the environment that we're going to be using for the bulk of the functional testing. We need that in place for the start of CIT. Also going to be running the primary functional test execution in that environment. We've also got a SIT staging environment that we're looking to set up, and we're aligning that environment to be set up for the beginning of functional testing. The purpose of that environment is going to be to run through defect retesting on the core systems and any associated regression testing before we deploy to the main SIT A environment. And that's to de-risk the schedule so that we don't deploy any releases that then slows down that SIT functional execution, which is obviously going to be very very involved. And then we've got SIT B, which we're going to be executing SIT migration, NFT, and SIT operations. We've aligned that environment set up to coincide with the commencement of SIT migration. There's going to be more discussion around this week in the environment working group in terms of when environment managers will need to be ready. All the detail is in the MPP, but we're going to draw that out a little bit more in the environment working group this week in terms of when we're expecting environments to be ready and for how long they'll need to be supported for various testing stages in each phase. So I'd recommend attendance of your environment resources in that working group for more information.
Yeah, we've got more questions.
Does that answer your question, Steve?
Sort of, yeah. I mean, you've got an assumption that you can run migration, NFT, and ops on the same environment at the same time there.
We do.
Which, yeah, okay. Okay.
I mean, our assumption is based on that we will have to do that via careful scheduling.
Right, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And date, it's the
you
data
know,
side of
yeah.
it as well that was of interest. But okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah,
that's fine.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Kevin?
Yeah, just a quick one from me. What happens to defects or unresolved defects at the end of each stage? Do they roll over into the next stage, or is the criteria there that prevents them from rolling over? Or...
I mean, we'd have to look at that on a case-by-case basis, really, within each stage. So we have defined a defect management plan and process, which we'll be publishing out shortly. But yeah, and in addition to that, there will be a release configuration management document that's going to be produced by the Environment Management Group. So yeah, it'll be on a case-by-case basis, really, and we'll set out some specific criteria, kind of in terms of benchmark, test approach and plan. So going from cycle to cycle, kind of what the target will be. We've also defined general exit criteria for each test stage as well, which I went through in SIP working group yesterday. But yes, there will be some criteria.
Yeah, no, that's good. Thank you, Dominic.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Matt?
Kind of expanding on Steve's question, as it looks as though you're expecting to run the NFT, SITOps, and qualification on the same environment at the same time, which should be potentially harder because two different or multiple different organizations organizing and running testing there. Yeah,
I mean, we've considered the options here. Yes, there will be some complexity in terms of scheduling, because some of that testing is obviously going to be mutually exclusive on any given day. And we will need to consider our test data management in that environment. I guess the alternatives would be to either run those test stages sequentially and therefore push out the end date for the SIT testing, or to request that we have separate environments for each of those testing stages. We've ruled out those two options at this point, but we would be obviously keen to hear back from participants in their round 3 consultation responses as to what their thoughts are in terms of the environment request.
I guess with qualification added in, it means that we've got 2 different organizations running testing.
No, that's another factor.
In the same place, which is just going to become difficult.
Yeah, there will be a period as well where we'll be expecting central parties in particular to be supporting environments for SIT and UIT testing as well, which is why we've not gone down the route of asking for multiple environments for the SIT migration, NFT and operation stages. But I think it's probably a good idea. So I know you guys have been looking for that clarity in terms of the overlap, to attend the environment working group this week, because that is going to be one of the agenda items where we're going to be looking at those periods of overlap, test phases and stages in a little bit more detail. Does that answer your question?
I guess so, yeah.
But for now, yeah.
And I think the last question from Carolyn.
Yeah, hopefully just a quick one. On slide 17, you showed the parties that were needed with the minimum number for MVC. I was just wondering if there was a level of detail within the smart data services, because we know that in the MDR rule for market-wide, that can either be performed by the supplier using their existing access to DCC, or them contracting it to the smart data service to use the DCC MDR rule delivered with SEC Mod 162. Does MVC have to have a MDR that is the DCC MDR, or can all of your suppliers perform the MDR rule themselves? Therefore, DCC won't be proving SEC Mod 162 in MVC.
The intention is for us to test the DCC MP 162 solution in SIP, Carolyn. Otherwise, we'll be missing a massive part of that top left corner of the top. But it's probably one for us to take into the SIP working group, just to be clear on what the expectations are there.
I think so, Jason, because I'm just not quite sure how big a pool that might be in time for the MVC timescales. So I'm just not quite sure how selective. I don't know how many people are going to come forward for MVC for you to accept versus maybe politely discard into the longer sit. And if that is a criteria, how limited that might make that selection criteria. That's all, just as an observation.
Yeah, I think it's a good one to capture for us to take into the SIT working group. At the moment, the feedback we've had from the agent community has been positive around having participants to execute the smart data service role, and including the MDR role. But obviously we'll get more insight into that, hopefully, as part of the responses back to the round 3 consultation. Sorry, I should have gone on camera, Carolyn. Sorry.
It's okay, Jason. And I've asked the DCC and Market-Wide Summit, I've asked if they're going to cover UEPT versus SIT timescales, because typically an agent, not all, but most, will use a software provider to connect to the DCC. So the software provider, like ourselves, would usually go through UEPT first, and then they can then place lines, which has kind of an extended time period. And UEPT is already quite a lengthy time scale. So again, I think we just need to coordinate realistically what can be done to ensure that both the DCC's UEPT and the market-wide's MVC for SIT can hopefully come together in terms of timescales for those that intend to use it.
That is exactly the sort of question that we want to prompt through that DCC workshop, because we want to target that on what are the activities required from a DCC specific perspective. And one of the objectives is to raise awareness that there are UEP activities that are required to be done in advance of SIT to support DCC testing for an accession of MDR parties before they come into SIT. So yeah, that's one of the main reasons for having the DCC workshop, is to highlight some of these early activities that are going to be required.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Karen. I'm going to move on, please, because I'm just conscious of time slipping away a bit. Qualification, Jason, over to you.
Yeah, sorry, I should have come on camera when I was answering Karen's question. But for those that don't know me, my name's Jason Brogden. I work in the central program team here at LVP, and particularly involved in some of the qualification and code drafting activities. And that's what I'll cover in the next few minutes. Conscious of time, so I'll try to keep my narrative focused in on the messages we want to get across. I think on qualification, there's a couple of things to say just before we run into the content of the slides here. And the first thing to say is that, again, to follow up from Keith's rabble rousing on the working groups earlier, there is a qualification working group running at the moment, and we are continuing to progress. We work to develop qualification arrangements to provide more details on how that's going to work, in particular some of the planned deliverables that are highlighted in the bottom right of this slide. The round 3 planning slides that we've got in here from the implementation approach, this described the snapshot of where we are and were in the development of the qualification arrangements at that point, and that's ongoing development in QWG. The other thing I'll say, and I see I have some of my colleagues from Electron and the code bodies on the call, is that the responsibilities for qualification do sit with the code bodies, and obviously the program is working closely with the code bodies in the development of the material for qualification, and how we substantiate what actually sits within the content of the core items, the 4 core elements that are identified in this slide. So we are ensuring the availability from the program of our test harnesses and some of the support we can provide from a testing perspective, and we will have all of the material that we will have from the SIT definition, the SIT scenarios, and everything that Don was talking about earlier, in order to provide as input into the material that might be required for qualification testing. So I would really encourage all of you who are interested in the qualification process to attend the qualification working group and the ongoing development of the materials associated with that. Carolyn, I see you have your hand up. Is that a legacy hand, or have you got?
It is. Sorry, that's me being sloppy. I'll take it off.
It's all right. I know you're always full of questions.
No, I haven't got another one. I promise. Not for now.
Okay, great. Joe, if we could move on to the next slide. So yes, so and some of the timescales for qualification have been looked at and described by Giles and also on the earlier slides. But the blue bars in here identify the activities that we've got to plan for qualification. The first top bar is preparation. That's quite a wide ranging bar that covers the development of the test scripts and the material required for qualification. So you'll see there's more detail in the Microsoft project plan on the preparatory activities that are required. And one of those is the testing approach and plan that is due to be approved in May this year. And that is a key deliverable and milestone, which is why it's put out in the qualification POAP here. The self-assessment documentation process is then the next activity. It's due to start in April 2024, and it follows the approval of the code drafting associated with qualification. So we know that the self-assessment process can be time-consuming. So once we've baselined that in code drafting, we're suggesting that parties can get on with that as early as possible and well in advance of actually executing the testing that is covered in the later bar. And as Giles said, what we've assumed at the moment for qualification testing is a 12-month period for qualification, split into 7 branches going through the Performance Assurance Board on a month-by-month basis. We then assume a 2-month window to allow tab approval and production environment mobilization before the start of migration itself. And that was the critical path in red that Giles showed on the POAP at the front. Those timing assumptions are our assumptions at the moment, and we are in dialogue with the Elexon qualification team as to whether those are practical timescales and what that might look like given the scope approach of qualification that's under development at the moment. So they are at the moment assumptions that are subject to further discussion and ratification. And that's all I was going to say on qualification. Okay. If we've got no further questions, I'll whistle into the code drafting.
Yes, please, Jason. I think just for the time.
Yep. Code drafting is reasonably simple. I'll whistle through it because there weren't a lot of changes from code drafting from round 2 to round 3. The key outcome of the code drafting is the suite of code changes that are required across PSC, REC, Diffuser, and CUSC at the M6 milestone, that will then form the baseline for regulatory obligations. And the change between round 2 and round 3 has been the incorporation of change request 12, which included the drafting of consequential change into our program activities for M6. So if we move to the next slide, Joe. Thank you. That is the main change in the timeline for code drafting. We've introduced topic I, which is consequential change, and that has had a consequential impact on M6 of extending the M6 delivery into April 24 from Feb 24 in round 2. Someone might correct me on that, either Jan or Feb. Apologies. So that did push out M6, but we had float in the overall program plan to do that, some critical path activity. The main dependency of this is the qualification self-assessment documentation activity I talked about in the previous section. So if we move on from that, Joe, I think this is a slide that we've used a number of times, again, the same as round 2, that shows the generic development consultation review activities associated with the topic areas defined above. a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I think a lot of this is very familiar ground to people who've looked at code planning previously.
Okay, thanks, Jason. I don't see any questions coming through, so I'm going to swiftly move on, if I may, to migration, and over to you, Ed.
Thanks, Giles. Afternoon, everyone. Adrian Page. I'm SI lead on the Half Valley program here. Wanted to just talk through where we were on the migration activity. There'll be a similar theme here with us referencing to the working groups that we're using to develop the plans here. So just to make sure set context here, so parties have been through SIT or qualification and are then ready to commence migration, and the activities to go about that, we've lifted this slide straight out of the implementation approach, so you're welcome to read that in more detail. And I wanted to flag up, I know we're short on time, a couple of groups that we're using to develop this. So the first one that's in the bottom right hand box there is the migration design subgroup. So this was set up underneath DAG to put together, as it says on the tin, the migration design, including reverse migration, now that we've had that decision through the PSG. So John Wiggins is leading that group, and next meeting is tomorrow, if I remember correct. And we very much encourage people interested in that aspect of things and how that design is going to operate to attend those sessions. The second group is the migration working group that Carly's been leading, and John will be picking up from her when Carly finishes this month. And that's where we're developing very much the approach and the strategy, looking at data assessment, and where we've been doing some high-level modelling and sharing of some high-level modelling with regard to the migration timeline, and that's where the 18 months got born out of, right? Giles referred to it right at the beginning of the meeting. If we just go forward one slide, I just wanted to show you the output of that model, and on the right-hand side is a graph over the 18 months, and on the left-hand side are just a few keynotes there that I just wanted to draw attention to people in these sessions. This is what we're going through at the migration working group, and we've got the next meeting of this on Thursday. But we've broken that migration down into three stages, really, as it says on the left there. There's an initial ramp up. These will be the first parties out of SIT. This will be on the back of the fact that the LDSOs are all in place, so we won't have any geographic restrictions. And at the moment, we're just making a high-level assumption there that there'll be approximately 5 million M-pounds available to start that migration. Actual numbers will get verified as we see who is putting their names forward for SIT, and obviously will be something to monitor as those parties go through SIT. Having established, proven all the systems from a migration perspective and that ramp up, you would then see full-scale activity of both SIT and non-SIT and qualification parties coming through, and that would continue to approximately 95% of meters are migrated, and then we would see, as you would with any other migration, a tail that will take what is usually an increasing amount of time for a ever-reducing number. And that we've put in there as 3 or 4 months at the moment. As I say, all subject to working this through more with the working group and getting energy suppliers to put forward their expectations of when they would migrate, which would be a good thing to have as a sort of stack graph underneath this as to when the parties are there. And just to finish this section of migration, if we just go forward a slide, it just got some dates on it. So we're at the bottom of this slide in migration. We've got the two elements there. So what we're showing on here is from the April 2025, the first parties will be coming out of SIT, having done both SIT and the SAD qualification business processes. So they will be available to start migrating from that date in April. And I'd expect there'll be some from April and some in May and some in June, etc., as parties come through. And then the first people out of qualification will be coming in there can't even read that figure myself. September, I think it says, should be September 25. Yeah. They'll be the first parties out of qualification, and as per Jason and Giles was saying, there's seven groups of people doing that, 7 tranches of qualification. So parties will come in with that target date of end of September, beginning of October to 2026 to have completed migration. Obviously, that does feel a long way away at the moment, and I'm sure there'll be some changes to the exact format of that timeline. But that's the 18 months that we were talking about at the beginning of the session here. So that's a very quick whistle stop on that. I got a question, I think, from you, Steve.
Yeah, I'm not sure. As I understand it, the migration design's not complete yet. So if we don't know the migration design, how can we sort of put forward a plan that we can be confident in? Reasonably confident in. Let's not, you know, at this stage, because isn't it the function of the design that's going to determine how quickly we can go?
So yes, that would be true. It will be there, but there's enough knowledge around the high level about design at the moment to put us something forward. The idea of John Wiggins leading in this area going forward is that he's been leading on that design, and if we need to address any changes as a result of that, we can do. I think experience also kicks in here of having done large migrations, and the sort of experience there is what we've used to determine that at the moment. So far, feedback at the migration working group has been it's a reasonable approach. We don't know all the details yet.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, yeah, I mean, if the design's well advanced, then yeah, it's very reasonable. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, that's all right. Thank you.
Okay.
Probably just ask Jason. We were just talking.
We the box around migration, but there is bar at the bottom that Giles referenced earlier and talking through the Power App, which is the M16 approval window. M16 is the cutover to the new settlement timetable. And again, this is a change in the round 3 region. We have we've defined a window for the approval of M16 on the basis that we shouldn't be driven by timing for M16. We should be driven by a set of criteria that are met in order to cut across to the new settlement timetable. And that would probably be around stability of the operation of arrangements. So that's why we've got a window in there, and we've allowed a minimum of 2 months to bed in the new arrangements and a maximum of 6 months on the basis that we shouldn't have this as running forever, and we should have a stop in there, but it should be driven by meeting stability criteria and not some arbitrary timing. So that's why we put it in as a window, just to add to the slide. Thanks, Charles.
Okay. Thanks, Tracy.
Okay,
I'm
thanks, Tracy.
going to just move on. There's one more slide we'd just like to cover off in the remaining few minutes.
Okay. Yeah, so alongside completing migration and cutting over to new settlements, we need to make sure that there's a few activities that are addressed. And in particular, I just wanted to reiterate to people on the call today, we're expecting that there's something around service management here. So as it says on the first bullet there, we're expecting parties to have their own service management model. And what we want to do from a program perspective is have some assurance that those models are in place. Who I would expect to be working closely with Alexa on that. And then in the second bullet there, we've just pulled out that during that period of migration, we're expecting there may be some additional support required because of the things that might crop up during that migration, particularly when we remember that we've got both old arrangements and new arrangements live at the same time there for parties. I think the rest of that, Giles, I'll probably let people just absorb as part of the implementation approach rather than and then give ourselves at least a couple of minutes for some questions.
Yeah. Thank you, Aid, for going through that swiftly. So I'll just open it up for just 1 or 2 questions in the remaining couple of minutes, if there are any. Nigel.
Hi, apologies. I'm just going back to the start of the meeting when Jenny Booth mentioned the difference between software providers and central parties, and I'm just wanting to make sure I wasn't missing something, because we are not a central party. We are definitely a software provider, but we're also kind of aligned more with the suppliers and using their market interaction suites. So I just wanted to make sure that there was nothing inferred from what Jenny was kind of saying at the header of the program that we may have been in the wrong meeting, or that going forwards, this is not the right place to be.
Okay, Nigel, I think Jenny's just put her hand up, so maybe is that for a response, Jenny?
Thank
Yeah,
you.
no, I wasn't trying to infer anything there. It was just to make sure when any participant on this call was responding, I could understand the aspect that they're coming from. So if central parties are co-governance parties and software providers are service providers to any party, be it a DNO or a supplier or whatever, then that just gave me a better context of what was driving the questions. So
Understood.
so I just wanted to make sure that I understood who was on this call, and if there were any particular questions, I could make sure I understood where they were coming from and understand the context a bit better. But there was nothing in there about people being on the wrong call or anything. It was really making sure I understood the membership of this group.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. I just want to make sure, obviously, going forward, if we're joining other calls related to this, we were in the right one. So that's fine. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Johnny. And just the last question here, I think, given the time we're at now, Matt.
A really quick one from me, I think. I think in the code drafting you had transition text in for April 23. Does that mean you're expecting to have transition design done and completed by then? Because I can't see it on the plan anyway.
I think that is the. I'll have to take that away, to be honest, Matt, because I'll have to have a look at what we define as transition text, whether it's transition in terms of sunset clauses from a code drafting perspective, or whether that's transition in terms of in terms of the transition period from through migration. So I'll have to have a look at that. We'll have a look at the dependencies.
Okay.
Okay. I'm conscious we are 1 minute past 5, so I think it just leaves me to thank everybody for their time and input and questions from today. They are always helpful to us, and I hope it's been helpful to you to sort of hear the shared questions as well coming through. I'm really conscious that we didn't really have time for a very extended wrap-up of questions at the end. Just wanted to draw your attention to the email link, the PMO email. So if there are other questions that you've got on reflection from today, or indeed reviewing the recording again, which will also be on the portal, please do send them through to the PMO. The questions are always good questions. It helps us evolve and refine the plan as well, and of course keeps yourselves very much engaged and aligned as well. So we certainly do welcome those. It just leaves me to thank you for your input. So I'm just going to look at Keith to see if there's anything else, Keith, you'd like to state. Yeah. I think we're done. Have a good evening when it arrives, everybody. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.